consumers, or generally speaking, anyone who would have to give away their personal data have to be informed.
Welcome to the Contract Teardown Show from Law Insider, where legal experts tear down contracts from some of the most well-known companies and high-profile executives around the world.
In this episode, in-house counsel and legal content creator Sarah Ouis tears down the Domino's pizza privacy policy. She does it in a unique way, though, showing us her process for turning complex legal information into accessible visuals for consumers. It's a fascinating look forward for contract drafters who prioritize understandability. So, let's tear it down. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Contract Teardown Show. I'm Mike Whalen. The purpose of this show is exactly what it sounds like. We get together, we beat up contracts with smart friends like Sarah Ouis over here. Sarah, how are you today?
Hey Mike, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I spent most of my morning chasing squirrels off my back porch. You know what they said to me? They said, plant mint, and then the squirrels won't dig anywhere in your garden. So hilariously, I went outside today, and the one plant that was dug up was the mint plant. So I'm losing at life, but we're trying. Our COVID hobbies are lasting. Today, guys, we're going to talk about a document from Domino's. It is this document. Let me share it real quick. This is the privacy policy, and as you see, there are many words that consumers will never read. So, Sarah, why are we talking about this document? Where does this thing come from? When are lawyers going to see it?
That's a great question, Mike. So, I guess the reason really being that a privacy notice is a legal requirement under European legislation. A data protection legislation. So consumers, or generally speaking, anyone who would have to give away their personal data have to be informed in how their data is going to be used, right? Now, the reality is that most of the time, they will be informed in such a way that is legally worded. And that clearly, as you were saying, people without a legal background won't necessarily understand, let alone read. Right. So that's obviously the purpose of having chosen this document.
Right. So we're going to have a conversation about simplifying this thing. That's the gist of the conversation. Sarah, what about you? What's your background? What are you bringing to this document from Domino's?
So I'm a commercial lawyer. So I do work in-house. And I have a commercial and data protection background. And in addition to that, I'm a legal content creator. And I'm very passionate about making legal content a lot more engaging and accessible, and leveraging my creativity to that extent. So that's the reason why, I was passionate about the idea of, taking a privacy policy like the one of Domino's, which is obviously an iconic brand, and transform it and make it a lot more digest, pun intended.
Creativity from a lawyer. You're a mad person. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to focus on a couple of sections, and I'll show these to you guys real quick. In the privacy policy, there are a couple of sections that are relevant. This who are we section, and this what information do we collect and how do we collect it, and a bit in the direct marketing. So these are sort of the things that often come up in these privacy policies, and as you said, are important for the legislation in the UK and some in the US as well. Being clear about who you are, who they can sue, right? If something goes wrong, and then also what are you doing with my stuff, so I know if I can sue you, right? So we're going to go through those. What was interesting about this, you and I talking about this, is you went through a process that I found interesting. It was sort of a text first, then a visual, then a really visual. So we're going to talk about how you went through that process. So to do that, first thing, let's talk about this who are we section. When you look at this text in the original document, it says the controller of our sites is Domino's Pizza UK and Ireland Limited, we, us, our, of 1 Thornbury, West Ashland, Milton Keynes, blah, blah, blah. If you have any questions about blah, 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 right? Like just a lot of words. You went and revisited this. Tell me about the process for how you got to this initial text, which is much more, I would say, website-y speak, right? Like blog-y speak.
Yeah, so we, as you were saying, Mike, so I've had really two versions of it. So the first one being, how can I simplify? How can I simplify the essence of the document? So as you were saying, I mean, if you look at the document, who are we? The controller of our site is I mean, if you're not a lawyer or if you don't have a privacy background, you don't even know what a controller is, right? So I went through that process of, starting with simplifying, as opposed to just say the controller of our site is, well, who is the legal organization you are talking to, basically. So that was my thought process, simplifying the language itself. And then, because at the end of the day, it's just a way to introduce the organization.
Right. And I want to give credit to the language that you wrote. You sent to me, you may know us under Domino's, but our real company name is Domino's Pizza UK. So you started with sort of where they're coming from and started to move them along. You gave the address, which is legally what that's what you're actually trying to get to people is the address. Yeah. You talked about the data protection officer, and you stated it as if he's an actual person. You can contact this guy. Here's his email address. Again, much more accessible to, I know where you're coming from. I know you're landing on this document because you're ordering a friggin' pizza. You don't want to read a big long thing. So call David, right?
Call David if you have information about your personal information and the way we use it. But yeah, so the idea is to simplify, again, as opposed to say the controller is, as you said, you may know us under Domino's, but our real company name is Domino's Pizza UK and Ireland Limited, right, for instance. And as you were saying, personifying who the data protection is, because he's an actual individual and he's there to answer any questions. So not only it simplifies the language, and it does build trust as well from the end user's perspective.
Hey everybody, I'm Mike Whalen. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Contract Teardown Show. Real quick, I want to ask you to do me/you really a quick favor. Look down below. You'll see a discount code to join the Law Insider Premium subscription. When you do that, you get access to more content like this. You'll see webinars, daily tips on contract drafting, not to mention access to the world's largest database of sample contracts and clauses. It will help you write better contracts faster. If you want to do it right now, there's a code below, so get there. Also, if you're part of a larger team, if you're in-house or in a law firm, just email us. We're at sales@lawinsider.com. We'll make sure you get a deal as well. Come join us in the community. The code is below. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, going on in the document, they said each franchisee is independently responsible for its own legal and regulatory compliance and for the operation of its own Domino's Pizza stores and all compliance arising from any transactions with you, any products from you, et cetera, et cetera. Again, you jump from that to what are they trying to do, right? That's what I'm getting from your process is, what are you trying to do here, as a writing exercise? What are you trying to communicate? And who are you trying to communicate it to? And you shifted that language to, okay, this is where it gets messy, but to cut a long story short, we do not own all the Domino's shops around the world. So assuming that's your framework, that you're saying, who's this for? What are we trying to say to them? How do you select that out of a document like this? What's the take-home message kind of process? How do you find that?
So I think when I first came across this language, obviously, as you were saying, the concept of franchise in itself isn't necessarily known from, the everyday Joe, if you will. And that's where, the way I transform this language is very much by thinking, okay, clearly it's a bit complex. So I'm setting the framework. That's where it gets messy. However, it's not that messy or it's not that complicated, but you have to understand that Domino's don't own all the Domino's shops around the world, which could be a fair assumption. If you just see, the Domino's brand and logo, you may just assume that, they are one and the same legal entity or part of the same corporate organization. So again, the idea is to introduce the franchisees and, the franchisee concepts in a much more easy to understand format.
So I'm thinking about process again, like this is ruminating in the back of my head as I'm continuing to process your genius on this. Let's scroll down to what information do we collect and why do we collect it? This is, to your point earlier, in terms of legal requirements, really important. That the whole point in that legislation is that the buyer understands, the user understands what's happening with my data. In their original, which I should give them some credit, by the way. Their language is not nearly as dense as some documents that I've seen, right? So I want to give them some credit, but it is still, written for maybe a pretty smart legal industry person. The way they write about this, when you visit our sites, we may collect information such as your browser type and version, and anonymous information collected from cookies, which when you are browsing our sites. Again, a lot of terms that somebody ordering some pizza might not understand. What did you think about? What were you trying to focus on when you ran into this language about the information that's collected?
That's a great question. So here really, as you were saying, when you order a pizza, you don't necessarily anticipate that, your information about your browser might be collected. And what is a browser anyway? If you think about the whole concept of a browser, at first, and that's why obviously they have the legal obligation to inform people. Again, the idea is how you do it and how lawyers can leverage their creativity to do that. So again, as opposed to say, information such as your browser type and version and anonymous information, I went through the process of, explaining what a browser is. So for example, if you use Google Chrome, that's a browser. So again, trying to go the extra mile and being a bit more creative by simplifying the language and being more explicit.
Right. The language you substituted as you went through this process. And by the way, guys, we're going to take this to the next level in a minute. You said it may sound random, but we collect information about your browser. For example, if you use Google Chrome or Safari, just to be clear on that, and the small files that we also call cookies we have installed in our websites would give us some even more random information, which stays anonymous. Again, I'm seeing we've been talking like we talk. Let me talk like you talk as part of this process. It's not simplicity for simplicity's sake. It's not like let's just cut down the word count. It's let's get to the language that will communicate to you what we're trying to say. Going down to direct marketing, this is the last section we'll talk about, and we'll do some more iterations so that y'all can see how this continues to get simplified. Under direct marketing, it says, when you place an order on our sites, we will send you occasional marketing via email and SMS. Your language says, when you order from us on our websites, don't be surprised if you receive some emails and text messages from us. We just do that so we can keep you posted about our products and make sure that you do not miss out on the best deals available. Again, I'm seeing, let me get to why we're trying to say this. Who's it for? What are we trying to say? Let's make that purpose clear.
Absolutely. In plain language.
Yeah. So to summarize this step, you said, I've got a bunch of words. Let's turn it into understandable words. But then you went to a next level. And I want to talk about that. You sent me another document that was, I would say, visual as well as textual. You used, visual elements in this as sort of, I'm almost thinking of them as headings. And so I'll show you all this document that Sarah prepared. But you're using these visuals almost as headers to say, like as benchmarks to move me through this. Talk to me about taking that language that you've cleaned up and you've made more human, now adding these visual elements to help people understand what it is that they're reading.
I mean, as I often say, and as we often say, I guess, a picture is worth 1,000 words. It just makes it a lot more digest when there is an icon associated to a topic. Mm-hmm. And that's why, whenever I produce a visual, I always try to incorporate an icon that would somehow reflect the purpose of the content. It allows people to better navigate through the documents. So it's very much, as you were saying, a mixed bag of plain language, plain English, and obviously visual elements.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, in writing and particularly in blogging, in web reading, there's been a bunch of research on web reading. Even with judges, I heard a really interesting presentation that was, your judges are now reading your briefs on an iPad. And they read that differently, so you have to write differently. And one of the points that just kept coming out was people really focus on the headers, on the headlines, on the blocky text, on the visual elements. And the way you've addressed this really seems to take that and say, okay, I made the language accessible, but now I've got to recognize you might not even read that sentence. Let me punch you with something that will at least communicate what I'm trying to say, yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about through this process, fluff. Let me push back on this kind of process by saying it risks the introduction of fluff. I think people watching this will be like, dude, why are we doing this stuff, right? Like, this is going to make it take longer. This is going to actually make it harder for people. You could have just said this in a sentence. And I think at this level, that's a real risk, right? If you say in your mind, I've got to put icons on here, it's just as likely that you're going to put icons that become sort of a visual blur and get confusing. So you took it to an even nexter level and created this document that I'm sharing with you guys. This is a branded visual that summarizes the document. Specifically, we're seeing two documents here, two images here, one that's focused on that "Who are we" section, and another that's focused on the data and the marketing piece. So talk to me about this first one, "Who are we?" What were you trying to do with this? How did you use these visuals to sort of strip out and not confuse you, right? Like, rather than just adding visuals to say, I added visuals, the visuals here seem to be doing something. What did you do with this visual?
So the idea really behind this visual is to demonstrate that, the privacy notice can be used as a marketing tool as well, to obviously communicate with the customer and kind of reinforce the brands with the use of their colors and obviously their logos and stuff like that. So that's very much the intent. Just because it is a legal document, you have a legal obligation to inform people in terms of how you will be using their data, doesn't mean that you can't do it in a branded way that again reflects your brand. So that's the intent here.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about that from the user experience. Like, if I'm on the app and I'm ordering a pizza, every other piece of that experience looks similar, right? Like but when you pop up to the legal document, it's almost like you're immediately slapped in the face. This is a different experience. This is something you don't like. This looks like lawyer speak. We're not just talking about marketing in terms of sticking with the branding. It's marketing in terms of sticking with the experience they've had so far, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so,
absolutely. And build trust as well, because as you said, the first experience, if you come across it, just a traditional privacy policy is very much, that's legal language, and it's written in very small font, and I won't be reading that. In fact, here is the same document in essence. It does achieve the same purpose, but it's a lot less legally worded, and it has a branding element.
Yeah, speaking of the purpose, I mean, you made clear on here what that first section was trying to do. There's the contact information. Email David. Here's his email. You talked about what a data protection officer is. You give the location, and there's the company information down on the bottom left. In terms of what you're required to do under the law, which is communicate basically who can you sue if we screw up, right? That's really what this purpose is if we mess up, you need to know how to contact us. This checks those boxes. This gets it to them in a really direct way. Looking at the other document, the how we use your data space, it has to communicate a lot of information. There's just a lot of stuff that you need to know because we do a lot of things with your data. I like that you use this visual of the pizza because, a pizza can have a lot of toppings. Talk to me about how you landed on this as a visual, this particular thing as a visual, and then how you incorporated all the pieces of information that you were trying to communicate with this section.
So here, really, I kind of thought about, again, keeping the branding. So that's why obviously in the background, you will have the blue and the red, which are colors of Domino's. And, at the end of the day, Domino's are known for pizzas, right? So as opposed, again, to, incorporate a lot of words, how about leveraging a pizza? And as you said, a pizza slice or a pizza, generally speaking, has toppings. So obviously what you see on the top of the pizzas are, the different toppings in terms of how the data is going to be used. And in the European legislation, there is the layered technique approach. So when you communicate the privacy information, the data protection authorities would recommend the usage of layered techniques. So in other words, you can have a first layer which sums up, the key information And then, you can allow your users to go, further down and click on whatever, sections of the policy that they want. If they want more information, that's the layered approach. So I've tried to duplicate this layered technique approach, which is recommended by the authorities, into this document. And that's the reason why you have a pizza slice with various toppings and a high-level overview of what is covered.
So is the idea that each of these would be live links that theoretically somebody could click through and go get more information if they want to? Yeah.
Potentially. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, stepping to the principles as we do to the big picture, I think somebody who you go to these seminars where people talk about visual contracts, and I think it's easy if I'm a lawyer who works in words to see this as sort of adding something, right? As adding fluff, as making this more difficult. But when I'm thinking about this particular context, you mentioned the word marketing. It's almost like you're not just marketing, hey, buy our pizza. You're actually marketing, read the friggin' document, right? Like, that people are sort of standard clicking through. It seems to me that using these kinds of visual tools are helpful for getting people to actually read the thing. Does that resonate? Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. It is an incentive, and I guess it's a nice surprise, for the end user. If I was to go on Domino's Pizza's website tomorrow and order a pizza, and there was, this type of privacy policy, I would be like, that's clever. Like, yeah. I would be very, surprised. And I guess it kind of reassures the end user as well in terms of how their data would be used. It builds transparency. And again, the brand, it's a marketing tool.
Yeah, stepping out, I was reading an article in the Harvard Business Review from a couple of years ago. Oliver Hart, I think, is the guy's name. He's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, and he had said we need to change the way we deal with contracts. Of course, people have been talking about this before, but when a Nobel Prize winner says it in Harvard Business Review, people pay attention. It was interesting to me because what he was talking about was simplicity for the sake of maintaining relationships, meaning he was saying, let's not list every possible bad thing that can happen. Just put down what are your intentions, what are my intentions, and let's get to work. That might make for a lesser contract, but might make for a stronger relationship. And the relationship is the thing that matters. I think we can see in a relationship with Domino's, these are small transactions. You want that lifetime value of the customer to continue. So do this so people feel good about you. How does this kind of effort, especially visually, translate to what he's talking about in terms of preserving a business relationship long term?
I think it's taking the privacy policy as an example is definitely powerful in a B2C context. And especially when you're a brand like Domino's or McDonald's or Netflix or, all of those, big names in the B2C space, it really allows those brands to, build the trust. So it's, I guess it's a different purpose, compared to obviously the example you were giving. Mm-hmm. It's a different objective, but at the end of the day, you are, building a relationship of trust with your end users, and you are meeting your obligations as well. Because again, in a B2C context, I guess it's generally accepted that the legal framework is much more protective in a B2C context because people are much more vulnerable. So what a better way to comply with your obligations, by providing documentation that is easy to understand, even engaging, accessible, with your branding. Again, there is no prohibition to use your brand in a privacy notice. So yeah, I think it very much builds the trust, helps the organization complying with the legal requirements as well.
Well, but even in the B2B context, what he was talking about in that piece was like, if you've got charts or graphs or timelines, that is an easy win. But, he even talked about using, like you did, right, using visualizations to summarize large chunks of information. There's not much downside to making it easier for people to read those. So even in the B2B context, I think we can use these sort of tools 100%. And ideas. Yeah.
100%. The B2B, I guess the B2B, the main benefit I would see is obviously your faster turnaround times with the transactions. Because obviously when you negotiate big contracts, 100 pages long or what have you, it takes forever, let's face it. So the purpose is slightly different, but as you said, it builds the trust in other ways. And and as you said, let's focus on, what we want out of this business relationship, as opposed to try to anticipate every potential worst case scenario that may never materialize anyway.
Yeah, and I had read about, apparently Shell has famously done this. They've gone to visual heavy contracts. They've really tried to summarize. And I think if I can, make a take home message, it's largely that simplicity has a value of its own. So in your first round, we were just trying to simplify, make it accessible. But once you start down that accessibility train, trying to make sure that people understand that there's an agreement and understanding, that you start to cut out all of what is the actual fluff, which is lawyers adding, too much negativity to a contract that can really risk a relationship. These sort of visual tools help for clarity. They help for engagement. They help for securing the understanding. So I think it's important work that you're doing, and I hope people will reach out to you, learn more about this. If people do want to reach out to you, what's the best way to contact you, Sarah?
So they can contact me on LinkedIn, Sarah Ouis, and also on Instagram. If they are on Instagram, Very Lawyer Problems. That's where I do post my visuals as well.
Well, I appreciate you joining us. And for those of you who want to contact Sarah, please do. Also, you can get more information about these documents and see these visuals if you go over to lawinsider.com/resources. Finally, if you want to be a guest on the Contract Teardown Show, come join me and beat up some documents. Just email us. We're at community@lawinsider.com, and we will see you guys next time. Thanks again, Sarah.
Thanks again. Thank you, Mike. Take care.